Some love stories never truly end. Even when life fades and the world moves on, some connections remain, lingering in the quiet spaces between moments. She thought she had lost him forever, but the whispers in the night, the shadow at the edge of her vision, and the familiar touch in an empty room told a different story. Was it grief playing tricks on her mind, or was their love strong enough to defy death itself? Here's the continuation of the story based on the lingering presence from the intro hook. The first time she felt it, she thought it was just the wind. A soft, cool breeze brushed against her skin while she sat on the balcony, lost in thought. It carried the scent of rain and something else, something achingly familiar. It was fleeting, gone before she could fully grasp it, but it left a chill deep in her bones. She turned her head instinctively, expecting to see someone there. But the chair beside her was empty. It had been a year since he was gone. A year of silence, of aching emptiness in a house that once pulsed with laughter and whispered secrets between lovers. They had shared everything, dreams, fears, and a promise that even death wouldn't keep them apart. But death was cruel, and grief was even crueler, weaving its fingers into every aspect of her life, making even the simplest moments feel unbearably hollow. At first, she tried to convince herself that it was just her imagination. She had read about grief playing tricks on the mind, how the heart refuses to accept what is gone, crafting illusions to make it bearable. Maybe that's all it was. Maybe she just missed him too much. But then it happened again. She had been in their bedroom, standing in front of the dresser when she noticed it, his watch, lying there on the surface. She remembered packing it away. She had placed it in a small velvet box along with his other things, tucking them away because the sight of them was too much to bear. And yet, here it was, resting on the wood as if someone had gently placed it there. Her breath caught in her throat. She reached out hesitantly, her fingers hovering over the watch. It was real, solid, cold. She picked it up, turning it over in her hand, her heart pounding. The second hand was still ticking. She wasn't sure if she wanted to scream or cry. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "Is this you?" The silence answered her, thick and suffocating. She let out a shaky breath and shook her head, telling herself it was probably her own mistake. Maybe she had taken it out without remembering. That's what she told herself until the radio turned on by itself the next night. She had been curled up on the couch, reading, when suddenly, soft static filled the room. She looked up, startled, as the radio flickered to life, its warm glow casting shadows across the dimly lit space. A song started playing, a slow, haunting melody. Their song. Her heartbeat thundered in her chest. She hadn't touched the radio in months, hadn't even realized it was plugged in. The melody drifted through the air like a whisper from another time, wrapping around her, filling her with an aching sense of familiarity. Her hands trembled as she reached for the dial, turning it off. The silence that followed was almost deafening. She was dreaming. She had to be. But then came the scent, the unmistakable smell of his cologne. It was faint, lingering in the air like a ghostly embrace. Her breath hitched, and she clutched the blanket tighter around her shoulders. It wasn't just her imagination anymore. Something was happening. She didn't tell anyone at first. What would she even say? That her dead husband was still here? That she could feel him in the empty spaces of their home? She wasn't ready to be told it was all in her head. She wasn't ready to accept that she might be losing her mind. But deep down, she knew she wasn't imagining it. One evening, as she sat on the bed, staring at an old photograph of them together, she spoke out loud. "I don't know if you're really here," she whispered. "But if you are, I don't want to be afraid." The air in the room felt heavier, charged with something she couldn't explain. She closed her eyes, waiting, listening. And then, as if in response, a soft brush against her cheek. Gentle, fleeting. Her eyes flew open, and she gasped. Tears spilled down her face as she placed a trembling hand against her cheek. It wasn't a trick of the mind. It wasn't a dream. It was him. She wasn't alone. The days that followed were filled with an undeniable presence. She could no longer convince herself that it was grief playing tricks on her, nor could she rationalize away the moments that kept occurring. The whispers of movement when no one was there, the flickering lights when she spoke his name, the feeling of warmth in the coldest corners of the house. He was there. She had always believed in the unknown, in energies that linger beyond death, but she had never expected to experience it firsthand. And yet, each passing day brought a new sign, a new moment where she felt his presence so strongly that it made her heart ache. One evening, she found herself in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup absent-mindedly, lost in memories. It was something he had always done. Stood behind her while she cooked, wrapping his arms around her waist, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. The thought made her chest tighten, and she bit her lip to keep the emotions at bay. And then, as if in response, she felt it. A shift in the air. A warmth behind her. A presence so familiar it sent a shiver down her spine. She turned sharply, expecting to see nothing. But the spoon she had set on the counter moments ago was now lying in the sink. Her breath hitched. Her fingers gripped the edge of the counter as she stared, waiting, listening. A deep silence stretched through the kitchen. No movement. No sound. Yet she knew. She wasn't imagining this. She wasn't alone. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone. She needed to talk to someone, but who would believe her? She hesitated before typing out a message to her best friend, Lena. I think he's still here. She stared at the words, hovering over the send button. It was ridiculous, wasn't it? A figment of her grief. A wishful illusion. But before she could change her mind, her thumb pressed down, and the message was sent. The response came almost instantly. What do you mean? Are you okay? Asterisk, asterisk. How could she explain? Would she even sound sane? She hesitated for a moment before typing again. I hear him. Feel him. Things move when I don't touch them. The radio plays our song. I'm not making this up, Lena. I know he's here, asterisk, asterisk. There was a pause before Lena's next message came through. Maybe you should talk to someone? Someone who knows about these things. Asterisk, asterisk. She frowned at the screen. A psychic? A spiritual medium? The thought sent a rush of unease through her. She wasn't sure she was ready to hear the truth. But she also wasn't ready to let go. That night, she lit a single candle in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the floor, staring at the flickering flame. The house was quiet, the air thick with something unspoken. Taking a deep breath, she whispered into the dimly lit room, if you're here, give me a sign. The candle flickered violently. Her heart pounded. She swallowed hard and tried again. I need to know, is it really you? The air seemed to shift, growing warmer, wrapping around her like an unseen embrace. A sensation she hadn't felt in over a year. Tears pricked at her eyes. I miss you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't know how to do this without you. The room fell into a heavy stillness. Then, the bookshelf across the room creaked. She turned just in time to see an old book slip from its place and fall to the ground with a soft thud. She hesitated before getting up, her steps slow and cautious. Kneeling, she picked up the book, her breath catching when she realized what it was. It was his journal. The one he had kept hidden in his nightstand. The one she had never opened after he passed. Her fingers trembled as she traced the leather cover. This wasn't a coincidence. She swallowed hard, then opened it. The first few pages were filled with his handwriting, thoughts, stories, and little notes. But then she saw it. A letter addressed to her. Her vision blurred with tears as she turned to the first line, reading the words he had left behind. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and I never got the chance to say what I needed to. Her hands clenched around the book. Her breath came in uneven gasps. I need you to know that love doesn't end, even when life does. And if I can find a way, I'll never leave you completely. A sob tore from her throat as she clutched the journal to her chest. She didn't know how, she didn't know why, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. He had found a way back to her. The journal rested in her trembling hands, its weight far heavier than just paper and ink. She traced her fingers over his handwriting, each letter a ghost of the man she loved. She had spent so long searching for answers, for proof that she wasn't imagining it all, and here it was, his words, his thoughts, left behind as if he had known she would need them one day. She took a shaky breath, turning the page. I don't know where I'll be when you read this, but if there's any way for me to be with you, I will be. I need you to understand that love like ours doesn't just disappear. If you ever feel me near you, it's because I am. Her breath caught in her throat. Was this the proof she had been waiting for? Was it really him she had been sensing all along? Tears spilled down her cheeks, landing on the paper as she continued to read. You were always the strongest of us. And I need you to be strong now. I need you to live. I need you to love. Not just the memory of us, but life itself. Promise me you won't let the weight of my absence stop you from finding happiness again. She pressed a hand over her mouth, a sob escaping. How could she? How could she move forward when every step felt like leaving him behind? The candle beside her flickered wildly, the shadows dancing along the walls. And then something happened. The air shifted. It was subtle at first, like a whisper against her skin. The room, which had felt so suffocating in its stillness, now carried a warmth, a presence so familiar it made her close her eyes. She wasn't alone. Are you here? She whispered, gripping the journal tightly. The candlelight dimmed for a second before flaring back to life. A choked sound left her lips. It was real. He was real. She reached for her phone, fingers fumbling as she typed out a message to Lena. I was right. He's here. I can feel him. I can prove it. The response came almost instantly. Come over. Please. You're scaring me. But she didn't want to leave. Not now. Not when she was finally on the edge of something she couldn't explain, yet couldn't deny. Why are you still here? She whispered, staring at the candlelight. Are you waiting for me to move on? A sudden chill passed through the room. Not cold, but something different. A sadness, an ache that wasn't her own. She swallowed hard. I don't want to forget you. The book in her hands shifted slightly, as if an unseen force had touched it. Her heart pounded as she looked down. The journal had fallen open to a new page. A page with her name written at the top. Shaking, she read the words beneath it. I know letting go won't be easy. But you deserve love, even if it's not for me anymore. Please, don't let my memory be a cage. Let it be a light. Her vision blurred as she clutched the journal to her chest. Every part of her wanted to fight it, to refuse to move forward. But wasn't that what had been keeping her trapped all this time? Maybe she hadn't been holding on to his love. Maybe she had been holding on to the pain. The candle flickered again, and this time, she understood. It was time. She exhaled shakily, placing the journal gently beside her. Okay, she whispered into the quiet. I'll try. The warmth in the room seemed to intensify, wrapping around her like an unseen embrace. And then, just as quickly as it had come, it faded. The candle steadied. The air stilled. The presence she had felt so strongly was gone. A sob shook her shoulders, but this time, it wasn't from pain. It was from something else. Peace. For the first time in years, she felt it. She wiped her tears, staring at the journal one last time before closing it. The love they had shared was real. It would always be real. But now, she understood, it wasn't meant to keep her in the past. It was meant to guide her forward. The next morning, she woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside her window. It was a sound she had heard 1,000 times before, yet today, it felt different. Lighter. As if the weight pressing on her chest had finally loosened, even if just a little. She sat up, her eyes immediately landing on the journal resting on the nightstand. A part of her hesitated to open it again, afraid that the magic of the previous night had been nothing more than a dream. But when she reached for it, her fingers still tingled with the memory of his presence. She traced the cover before opening it to the last page she had read. Her name, written in his familiar handwriting, still stared back at her. Let my memory be a light. A deep breath filled her lungs as she closed the book once more. It was time. Lena had sent her 12 texts throughout the night, worried, pleading for her to come over. And for the first time in years, she actually wanted to. She got dressed slowly, pulling on a simple dress and wrapping a light scarf around her shoulders. When she glanced in the mirror, she almost didn't recognize herself. Not because she looked different, but because she felt different. The hollow emptiness she had grown accustomed to no longer consumed her entire reflection. The past was still there, lingering in the corners of her mind, but it no longer felt like an anchor. It felt like a whisper. She stepped outside, inhaling the crisp morning air as she made her way to Lena's house. The streets were quieter than usual, as if the world itself knew she needed the space. When she knocked, Lena opened the door almost instantly, eyes wide with relief. "Oh, thank God. I was about to come looking for you." She pulled her into a tight hug, her warmth grounding her in the present. "You didn't answer your phone." "I know," she murmured, squeezing her back. I needed time." Lena pulled away, scanning her face as if searching for an explanation. "Did something happen?" She hesitated. "Yes. And no." They sat on the couch, Lena watching her expectantly as she tried to find the right words. How could she possibly explain something so intangible, so deeply personal? "I read his journal," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I felt him, Lena. I know he was there." Her friend's expression softened, a mixture of understanding and concern settling in her features. "Maybe he always has been." She swallowed hard. I think he was waiting for me to let go." Lena reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "And, do you think you can?" She let out a slow breath, staring down at their intertwined fingers. "I don't know. But, for the first time, I want to try." The words felt foreign on her tongue, yet as soon as she said them, a weight lifted from her chest. Lena smiled, brushing away a tear that had slipped down her cheek. "That's all that matters." They spent the rest of the day talking, really talking. Not about the past, not about the grief, but about everything else. The little things she had forgotten how to enjoy. By the time the sun began to set, she felt lighter. As she walked home, she stopped by the bookstore where they used to go together. She hesitated outside, staring through the glass at the rows of books. Would it hurt too much to step inside? Or was this part of moving forward? Before she could change her mind, she pushed the door open, the familiar scent of paper and ink surrounding her. She ran her fingers along the spines, memories flickering in the back of her mind. She expected them to hurt, but instead, they felt warm, like echoes of love rather than loss. A book caught her eye, its title written in delicate gold lettering. She picked it up, flipping through the pages absent-mindedly, when something slipped from between them. A note. Her breath hitched as she unfolded the small piece of paper. "You found your way back here. I knew you would." Tears blurred her vision. It wasn't his handwriting. And yet, somehow, it felt like it was meant for her. She pressed the note to her chest, closing her eyes. Maybe this was how love worked. Maybe it wasn't about holding on forever. Maybe it was about finding the courage to keep going, even when you didn't know where the path would lead. With a deep breath, she placed the note back in the book for someone else to find. Then, for the first time in a long time, she walked forward, toward the unknown, toward the future, toward life. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and lavender as she stood at the edge of the bookstore, clutching the note to her chest. The warmth of the fading light wrapped around her like a quiet reassurance, a promise that the darkness would never last forever. She hadn't expected this moment to come. Not like this, not in the simple act of stepping into a place that once held so much meaning. And yet, here she was, standing in the middle of something that felt like a beginning rather than an ending. She traced the edges of the note, reading the words once more. "You found your way back here. I knew you would." Who had left it? Did it matter? The ache in her heart, once so unbearable, was no longer just pain. It was love. A love that had never really left. For the first time, she felt something close to peace. Taking a deep breath, she tucked the note back into the book and set it on the shelf. Maybe it would find someone else who needed it. Maybe it would be a whisper to another lost soul, just as it had been for her. She turned toward the exit, the bell above the door ringing softly as she stepped outside. The night air was crisp, carrying with it the scent of the rain that had fallen earlier that day. She exhaled, watching the small cloud of her breath disappear into the evening. It was time to go home. Home. The word used to feel like an empty space, but now it felt different. Maybe because she was different. She walked slowly, letting the sounds of the city guide her, letting the memories settle instead of overwhelm. Each step forward felt lighter than the last, like she was finally learning how to exist without the weight of grief pressing against her chest. By the time she reached her apartment, the sky had turned a deep shade of navy, stars beginning to twinkle in the vastness above. She stood on the threshold for a moment, glancing up at them, remembering how he used to say that every star was a story waiting to be told. Maybe we're all just echoes of love written in the sky, he had once whispered to her under the same stars. She smiled softly. Maybe he was right. Stepping inside, she felt an unfamiliar sense of comfort wash over her. She wasn't alone, not really. Love was still here, in the spaces between the memories, in the quiet, in the whispers of the past that no longer haunted but held her gently. She placed her bag on the counter and pulled out his journal, the one she had hesitated to open for so long. She ran her fingers over the worn cover before flipping to the final page, the one she had read so many times now that she knew the words by heart. Let my memory be a light. And it was. She reached for a pen, hesitating only for a moment before writing beneath his words. I found the light, and I will carry it with me. The ink settled into the page, final yet freeing. A conversation between two souls across time, across loss, across love. She closed the journal and placed it back on the shelf. As she moved through the apartment, something shifted inside her, a quiet, powerful acceptance. She had spent so long holding on to what was, afraid of what moving forward might mean. But she wasn't letting go. She was carrying love with her. She poured herself a cup of tea, standing by the window as she watched the city breathe around her. The laughter of people on the streets, the flickering lights from apartment windows, the gentle hum of life moving forward. She was part of it again. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a message from Lena. You okay? She smiled, typing back. Yeah. I think I will be. And she meant it. She would always miss him. The love they had, the moments they shared, the way he had changed her life. But love wasn't meant to be trapped in the past. It was meant to live on, to grow, to become something new. She placed her cup down, stepping onto the small balcony, looking up at the stars once more. Somewhere, somehow, she knew he was smiling too. And for the first time in a long time, she whispered back. Asterisk, thank you for loving me. I'll be okay now. Asterisk. The wind carried her words into the night, and she let herself believe that they reached him. And with that, she stepped forward, not away from love, but toward it. Toward life. Toward whatever came next.